Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us. My name is Michelle Hirsch, and I am the Federation's Women in Philanthropy co-chair. You are seeing me outside because I have 2 children at home and a crazy house, so I figured those cool backgrounds that you see from Zoom can just be like live for me. And you can hear the birds chirping and my neighbors going past me, and it's just a wonderful day in the neighborhood. We are here tonight. Thank you so much for joining. This event is brought to you by Women in Philanthropy, which whole mission and goal through the Federation is to engage women with shared values, to leverage our collective purpose and strengthen our community. And tonight we are so fortunate to have such a fabulous program for everyone. We have Sue Boursin, who is a good friend and mentor of mine, who has quite the connection, the family connection here. And when she first got to see this film at the premiere night, she came back and was just raving about it. And we had all these ideas to have this film be in person and a viewing in a big theater with everyone around us. And due to the current circumstances, here we are via Zoom, but it's still happening. And so I want to thank Sue for not only making this happen, but having the idea to have this happen in the first place. So Sue has with us here tonight to join the Zoom conversation, Jim Lebrecht, Sarah Boulder, and Nicole Noonan, the writers, producers, and directors of Crip Camp, which is currently on Netflix. And whether you've seen the movie or not, I can guarantee you that this panel discussion is going to be fantastic. And after the panel, we will hear from Debbie Chickering, who's an executive director at JFSA, to learn about what the disability community is doing here in Cleveland to engage and to help this community thrive. And so without further ado, before I turn it over though quickly, we talked about the closed captioning. So if anybody is not seeing that, please chat in the chat box. And then also just a reminder that during such a challenging time, Federation is here for you. And if anyone you know or you need help during all the craziness that's happening right now, please reach out to Access Jewish Cleveland, where we can help connect you and make sure that you get the help that you need. And without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Sue and our panelists so we can jump into this inspiring, amazing film that has left such an incredible impression on so many people. Sue, it's all yours.
I want to take a moment just to acknowledge how challenging the last week has been for America, for us personally. And I want to share a quote that's attributed to a woman named Lila Watson. "If you have come here to help me, you are wasting your time. But if you have come because your liberation is bound up with mine, then let us work together." I think this quote is remarkably appropriate for the last week and also for Crip Camp and talking about the movement and the community of disabled men and women. So I just wanted to start with that. I don't think they're distinct. I don't think what's happening now in America is different for Jim and his community. And so I want to acknowledge that for Jim and for all of us, we are seeing ourselves as our liberation bound up with yours. Your movie, for me, did that. It made me realize that until you have the freedom to travel on an airplane the way I do and to get access to buildings all over the country, that really none of us are free in the way that we want to feel in our souls. So let me start by saying thank you, Jim, and thank you, Nicole, and thank you, Sarah, for giving that gift to all of us. Okay, I'm going to tell you a little bit about the movie. There we go. So Crip Camp began its journey. Well, first of all, for me, it began the journey at Sarah and Jim's table when they had this idea. So I was there even before when it was before a seedling. But it began its journey to the screen during an hours-long lunch in Oakland, California, between Jim and Nicole. Jim, an award-winning feature and theatrical sound designer and mixer, has worked for decades with Bay Area-based documentary filmmakers, including on 3 features from Emmy-winning documentary producer and director Nicole. Jim, who was born with spina bifida and serves on the board of the Disability Rights Education and Defense Fund, has been attempting to convince his most frequent collaborators to tackle a documentary that focuses on disability and the disability rights movement for years. And here we are today, having witnessed this tremendous accomplishment, and we are so honored to be talking to all of you. I want to start with Jim. What inspired you to make this movie, and what was your goal in making the movie?
Susan, I just wanted to say thank you for having us here, and that although I think that basically there are many, many different people who are struggling right now or live under oppression, but I would certainly, I personally don't equate the struggles that the disabled have in this country with what we're really seeing as an open wound right now, that it is all particular. And I acknowledge that I have a great deal of privilege as a white man. So I just wanted to say that I'm proud.
Thank you.
Okay. Well, back at that lunch, Nicole and I've, like you mentioned, I've worked with Nicole for many, many years, and really consider her just a filmmaker that I've always loved working with a wonderful heart, making great films. And I knew that there was this story that I thought might be lost to history. And really it started off with this group of people from New York who I gone to summer camp with, heading out to Berkeley, California in the mid-70s. And I knew there was some kind of connection there that was important. And at the end of our lunch, I kind of had talked about other films around disability, but I kind of offhandedly, maybe almost sheepishly a little bit, said to Nicole that, you know, what I've always wanted to see was a documentary about my summer camp. And then she went, uh-huh.
You should say a little bit about why though, Jim.
Well, I've been working in documentary film for well over 20 years. My roots are in activism, and I started getting just more and more kind of politically riled up in regards to not seeing the representation or the stories around disability that I felt we really needed to see. That when you live under the stigma that people with disabilities live under, that translates to high unemployment and being treated by society as being disposable, and that I saw the power of documentary film. And I just wasn't seeing the film that I really felt would break through and really show the disabled experience. So that has been my goal for a long time. I mean, I'd have mixers, I'm mixing people's films, and, I talked to them about the inequities of just trying to be a director or somebody with a disability working in the film industry. So this was a kind of a natural outcome, I guess.
Okay, so Sarah, how was this movie funded? How did you get to the Obamas? And then what I really want to know is, are you best friends with Michelle now?
In our dreams. We had, for an independent documentary, a remarkably easy time fundraising. That's rarely the case. I think a big part of that was, and I think Nicole is going to be talking about this later on, how she found the footage of the camp from 1971, that amazing black and white footage. And she found it really early in the process of making this film. And then relatively quickly, we produced a really kick-ass promotional trailer. And I think based on that, based on Nicole's amazing track record, people knowing Jim, and that it was his lived experience, funders came on board very easily. And I think it's really the power, even before we had any edited footage of the camp, just seeing it raw, a couple of funders came on, because when you think about it, nobody has ever seen anything like this, right? It's a group of disabled teenagers. Nobody's tragic. Nobody wishes they were dead. It's all, they're having fun. They're sexy. They're kids. it's revolutionary, actually, that footage. So I think funders really were just excited very, very early. And some big funders also saw the potential for telling this unknown history, like the National Endowment for the Humanities and California Humanities realized, looking at this, that nobody knows this history. And it's one of the great civil rights stories of the United States, and it's unknown. So funders were really excited. Ford Foundation and Sundance came on board. That was a huge help. And in terms of the Obamas, so they had recently formed their production company at Netflix called Higher Ground. And the announcement was made that they hired their first person, Priya Swaminathan. Our wonderful executive producer, Howard Gertler, had this idea that this would be a great match for them, this story of people coming together across difference, making a huge change, a youth-led movement. The whole notion, when Howard first said it, I think I was just kind of dazzled, like, what? And then through Howard and a sales agent, we got through to Priya. She saw the promotional trailer. There were a lot of conversations. She came to the edit room to look at more footage, to meet everybody, make sure that people were on the same page. And I think Nicole and Jim especially felt like, this would be she'd be a great working partner. And then they said they wanted the film, and
And the rest is history.
It's still kind of unbelievable. And no, we're not best friends. However, during the day of the premiere at Sundance, the president called to congratulate everybody. And while I was flying around the ceiling, kind of incoherent, Nicole and Jim managed to have a very articulate conversation with Barack Obama. So yeah, it's an extraordinary platform. And we're just incredibly honored and thrilled.
I'm glad it was so, the money was so easy to raise, because I don't think that's a fairly typical story of a documentary.
It's completely atypical. And I don't want to say it was easy. It still took a long time, but we never had to shut down for lack of funds. That's something I think Nicole could speak to this better than me, because she's got a much longer producing history there, that I think this was a very unusual situation, and funders did get how different this was. Right?
I want to point that out in case anybody's listening and thinking about making a documentary film. It doesn't usually go that way. Okay, I'm going to ask Jim and Sarah the next question. How did it feel sitting in the audience at the opening of Sundance Film Festival? Your opening is happening on the opening day of Sundance Film Festival. What was that like?
I'll say for me, it was joyous. That's the only word I can say. It was a massive theater, 1,400 people, sold out. It was just spectacular, but what was even the most powerful part was almost everybody in the film was at the premiere with us. And so the end of the film, we hear this, the lights are down, there's a big standing ovation, and it took us a few minutes to get everybody onto the stage. And then the lights go up and everybody's there, Judy Heumann, Neil, Denise, and Dennis, Lionel, everybody's there, and the place went wild. And feeling that love and admiration and respect pouring out of the audience towards all these wonderful people was definitely one of the most joyous moments of my life, I'd say.
And Jim, how about for you?
Opening night was extraordinary experience, just because it felt like an acknowledgement of the disabled community in a way that had never been done before. Here you are at one of the most prestigious film festivals in the world. And we had, how many people, Nicole, from the camp?
8 or 9.
Yeah, it was just extraordinary to receive the applause, but just to understand that people were getting the film. You don't know until you're there that day, but that people they started getting the jokes and they started understanding, and we realized that the audience was getting it.
I can't imagine Sundance, but I got to be at the MoMA, Museum of Modern Art in New York, and the audience was in love with you. Like the story that you told you had a room full of people just so in love with you and the camp and the movement. And so for what you dreamt, you delivered, you over-delivered. Nicole, I wanted to ask you, what did it feel like to be part of the creating of this documentary? Was it different than other projects you had worked on?
I mean, it's a very special project and a really unique project. Is my connection okay? Can you hear me? Yeah. I mean, the whole process was filled with a lot of joy and humor and irreverence and creativity, which is, you know, one of the things that attracted me to it, is that had been my experience of working with Jim. And, you know, when Jim first approached me, he was thinking, here's a director I've worked with, maybe she could direct a film about, you know, disability, and maybe I could co-produce. And when I thought about it, I really thought, you know, there's kind of no way that I could direct this story with Jim in it, and it would be as special as if Jim was telling this story in his own words, in his own way. And I thought, you know, maybe something that's kind of a hybrid between a personal documentary and a historical documentary would be an interesting way to go. So I went to Jim and said, you know, I think we should co-direct this. And he loved the idea. And it actually, like Sarah had said, that we found the footage pretty quickly, but to me it felt like a heroic, long, long fought for achievement, because I basically, like, when we first started talking about it, Jim and I, we didn't have any idea how were we going to bring people back into this camp. It was really just a collection of photographs that had been submitted by campers that that really compelled me and made me think, like, this was
Oh, how sad. She's right there. Okay, we lost you for a second. Are you back? Nope. Okay, we'll keep going, and we'll go back to Nicole when she comes back.
Are you back now?
Nicole, we lost you for a minute, so maybe go back to, yeah, I don't remember what point we lost you at, but I think you're still frozen. Okay, so I'm going to move on, and we'll go back to Nicole, who was telling us some things. I'm on the edge of my seat, but we'll wait and go back. Jim, you, in your mind, always knew you wanted to include that summer of 1971. Was that, like, in the plan that you had, or did that come out during the creative process? And did you remember precisely that there was filming going on that summer?
Well, I had remembered that there was this group of hippie videographers that had shown up at camp, and that in fact they had stayed there for a few days. And one day they gave me basically they had me do a camp tour. It was a very kind of heavy duty tape deck that they strapped to the back of my wheelchair, and I held the camera while somebody pushed me around the camp. And I had that remembrance, and also that they had produced a short documentary that wound up on Manhattan cable television called The Crab Epidemic at Camp Jeanette for the Handicapped. So I knew there was some stuff out there, but all I remembered was that the word people was in the name of the group. But Nicole wound up, like, digging around for 2 to 3 months to try to figure out who these people are or what they were, because, oh my gosh, I'm saying, look, you know, I shot some of this black and, you know, this footage at Camp Jeanette. Wouldn't that be incredible? Which it would be. And so Nicole, you look like you're live. Do you want to pick up the story of finding the footage, or Howard, or should I just keep blasting through her on this?
I don't think she's got connectivity.
Okay, well, you know, what I will tell you is that after doggedly looking for the footage or these people, Nicole found what had been a reprint of an old Video Freaks magazine, and in there was an ad for that video about the crabs outbreak at Camp Jeanette. And she got the name of the group. It was the People's Video Theater. And then digging further, she wound up finding the name of one of them was Howard Gutstadt, and she traced him to an anarchist bookstore in San Francisco, which, you know, in the Bay Area, that's what you do. You're part of an anarchist bookstore, and left her information with them there. He was on the board of the bookstore. And we're literally in the editing room, we hear back from Howard Gutstadt about a month later saying he would love to talk to us. And indeed, there was 5.5 hours of this footage shot in 1971. And they were in the process of finally getting it transferred from these videotapes. And they were doing that right in San Francisco. Howard lived in San Francisco. And we won a meeting with Howard and had this incredible lunch where it was like after 45 years, he's meeting the guy that he handed the camera to so many years ago. And they really wanted to bring this technology, this new technology, to marginalized communities, to do something with this. And here Nicole and I are there saying, we'd like to try to use your footage to tell this story. It was just, we've had a lot of incredible breaks come our way.
Well, it's like this was meant to be made. That's what it feels like. It was all just waiting out there for you to find it, and it was meant to be made. How many years did that camp run?
The camp started in the early 50s. I mean, it had been around before that, but it was started by these two sisters in 1951, and it closed after the summer of 1977 for financial reasons. But it really kind of took on its more hippie-ish or more, counterculture feel to it in the very early 1970s when Larry Allison took over as camp director.
Okay, this is a question from Youth Abilities, the kids who are on the program at JFSA. They wanted to know, could anyone with any disability attend?
Yeah, you certainly had people with cerebral palsy, muscular dystrophy, hearing impairments, visual impairments. People had some cognitive issues. So it was a wide-ranging group. I think that by the time I got there, they weren't having really young kids there, but that probably the youngest kid was maybe around 12 or 13 or so. But they also had an adult camp.
They also had an adult camp, you said?
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm going to give you a few questions that are coming through in the chat. We'll weave back and forth. Elizabeth wants to know, how did the Center for Independent Documentary in Sharon, Massachusetts initially support the film?
Oh, that's, so in order to get donations from foundations, you either need to be a 501c3 organization or you get a fiscal sponsor who acts as that. So Center for Independent Documentary has been around for a long time, and they function as fiscal sponsors for many, many, many independent documentaries. And they're wonderful, they're great advisors. And so, we talked to them very, very early so that we could start accepting donations. And they've been wonderful, and they're still our fiscal sponsor and still working with us on this next phase, which I can talk about later, which is the impact campaign for the film.
Great, we'll do that in a little bit. Okay, so were you in touch with any of those campers? Like, did they become, how camp friends can be your lifelong friends? Did you have that experience from Camp Jened?
Well, certainly for a while I was in touch with a bunch of people, Nancy D'Angelo had moved to Berkeley along with Judy Heumann, and I would come up to the Bay Area once in a while from San Diego during college. But a lot of the folks from Camp Jened have just stayed in touch over the years. There's about 45 people on an email chain right now. So it wasn't like I had stayed in close contact with people, but to an extent, I lost touch for a little while, but I've been in touch with Judy for a long time.
And now you created a reunion for your group, right? Like how many people have seen the shows with you? Well, before COVID.
Well, I mean, we had a bunch of folks that we had somebody who was supportive that helped pay to bring a bunch of people out to Sundance. And so, also even at MoMA, just a lot of people got themselves there. There were some people in New York that were able to come to the museum on our art screening. But there's a very active group, I just see texts flying back and forth, and we get emails and such. So everybody's really excited about the film.
I was sitting in front of one of the campers' family, like, I don't know how many rows of them were sitting there, but they were woo-hooing, and the boy that does the dance with in his
Steve
underpants.
Hoffman. He
Yeah.
had 20, there were 26 of his family members there, including his daughter, Emily. It's a huge group.
Yeah, I mean, you didn't need to wonder. But it was really wonderful. It was lovely. Okay, so I had a question for Nicole, but I'm going to skip that, and hopefully she'll get on at some point. So accessibility, Jim, what does that mean to you personally? This is also from the Youthability Kids, that question.
No one's asked me that question, so thank you for that question. Accessibility means that I have the ability to participate like anyone else, and that I've got an equal opportunity to experience what is being offered. So, as a wheelchair user, it's, you know, it is indeed ramps, and it's, you know, and you know, being able to get through doorways, and very importantly, restrooms also. And for the visually impaired or hearing impaired, it is things like having captions or sign language interpreters. Crip Camp is a very, it's one of the more accessible, if not the most accessible titles that Netflix has, that it's been closed captioned into more languages than normally do. It's been audio described in a number of different languages. And there's even a script that was written for, that could be downloaded on the Netflix Crip Camp website, so that people who are deaf-blind can download this 161-page script.
Wow.
And experience the film.
Wow.
And they really, it's amazing.
Okay, so I don't know if who made the decision here, but how did you pick the name of the movie? Is that an editorial decision on your part? Where does that come from?
Early on, we knew that we needed a rather edgy title for the film, and this certainly was. So when we came up with the title, which I think was kicking around a little bit, and Denise Jacobson was part of that kind of, she consulted with us a bit on the film, on the story. We knew that we had something that was going to spark controversy or interest. And the intention behind using the word was really trying to reclaim, it's a couple of things. I mean, it's a sort, if you're politically kind of, I identify culturally as somebody with a disability. That for me, this is my community. And it is one way in which it's a kind of a shorthand to kind of talk about, you know, literature. We call it Crip Lit. And, or those blue parking spots could be Crip spots. And so Corbett, who's in the film, one day, years ago, you know, asked me, did you go to Crip Camp? And so, yes, it's shorthand, but it's also means that you identify politically and socially as someone with a disability. We had some discussions about the title and whether it was going to be misleading for people, but we kind of had a really good conversation with Netflix and their marketing people, and basically said, we need your help in reclaiming this word for the community. And we know that you folks are great at marketing and that you can do this. And our discussion was very much a back and forth, and it really, we wound up with the title. They asked, they said we'd like to put a subtitle in. So it's Crip Camp, A Disability Revolution. But besides that, we got to keep our title.
Yeah, that's great. That's a great story. Sarah, Judy Heumann, she's like bigger than life. And you got to really get to know her very well. What was it like to be part of her world during the creation of this film?
Well, through Jim, I had gotten to know her a little bit beforehand, but beforehand, I had no idea about this story. I didn't know who she was. I had never heard of her. And, as little by little, I'd learn more before the film even, my jaw would drop. My favorite story, which thank God it's in the movie, was her as a super young woman. What was she, 23? With gathering a group of maybe 50 people with disabilities, sitting down in the middle of Madison Avenue, Friday hour, rush hour in New York City, and bringing Manhattan to a halt. Yeah. I just adore her, and I feel completely honored that she's a friend, and she's still at it. She's in her early 70s. She is just always looking forward, right? I think that maybe is something that effective leaders have. They're maybe it's less a matter of optimism, it's just the focus is moving forward. What's next? How do we get there? So, it's one of the many just extraordinary things about being involved in this film. She's really incredible, and it's been wonderful seeing the reactions from test screenings early on of the film, where we would get comments like, people being angry. How come I've never heard of her? Why isn't she as well known as Rosa Parks and other disability leaders? Through people writing these gushy comments like, I love her, I want her to love me, I want to know her, so people wanting her story and the story of the movement in textbooks and everywhere. So she's incredible. Nicole, if you're back, the question was about Judy Heumann and getting to know her.
Even just watching her in the movie as a counselor, she's pretty young in that movie, and you can feel how much like a born leader she is. It's crazy. So Nicole, my question to you is, how was it to work with Judy during the process of creating the movie?
Can you hear me now? I'm sorry.
Yay!
Judy, Judy was the first phone call that we made when Jim and I started talking about the project. I don't know if you already said that to you.
Nope.
But I was like, okay, you have this theory, that there's something about this liberatory experience of the camp that is connected to the movement that came later, but how can we figure that out? Because I got really excited about that, and I started writing drafts of treatments that were all about that. And Jim was getting a little cold feet, wait a minute, that was just my theory. Should we necessarily be presenting this to funders as though this is true, that there was something about that experience that led to the exodus out to Berkeley and the Center for Independent Living and then the building. So he was like, okay, well, let's call Judy and feel her out. And I'll just never forget, hearing the sound of her voice come through. It was actually, I think it was in your van, Jim, on the way back from meeting Howard and talking about the footage. And she was just like, yes, there definitely was a connection. I remember lying in the bunk at night and talking to, the other girls in the bunk about, that was the time when we were seeing civil rights movement on TV, and we were asking ourselves, why can't we have a movement of our own? And so in a lot of our, initial conversations about the film with Jim and Sarah and I, we talked a lot about how would we reference the civil rights movement? How would we bring that into the storytelling? And I think that initially we thought it would have a much stronger presence through the stories of some of the counselors that had been involved in the civil rights movement itself. But as we started, digging into the archival material, we realized that we were going to be able to paint a much stronger portrait of the actual journey that Judy and other people took. And we were just finding all these little gems of, Judy talking about sexuality in that PBS documentary, sitting around with a group of her friends having the same kind of conversation she had at Jeanette. And I mean, for me, one of the most exciting things was hearing that story about her, getting told by this little tiny boy, are you sick, in her Brooklyn neighborhood, and feeling like an outsider for the first time, and how she talked about that feeling she had at the moment, which was this feeling of sort of, you know, like righteous indignation, like she wanted to cry, but she knew she had to steel herself and fight back. And then seeing that exact same emotional response play out, you know, other times in the film. And then finally at the end, after the victory of the 504, when she was asked by news reporters, you know, how does this make you feel? She said, finally, people will know that, you know, having a disability doesn't just mean you're sick. Which I felt like was this direct hearkening back to that, you know, that moment on the street in Brooklyn when she was like 6 years old.
I love that, because that was like, that's like, I was asking you before when you froze about like a moment in the movie that really touched you, and you got there even without being asked. So thank you very much.
Yeah.
Okay, Jim and Nicole, was there a reason why you decided that Jim would narrate the second half of the movie?
Oh, why even when he's not in the building
Yeah.
and not still a part of the story? What? Yeah. Do you want to talk about that, Jim? Or
I've done a lot of talking.
I mean, initially, actually, Jim was our initial concept. Freezing again.
Yeah. I can answer the question.
Okay.
Initially, our early thought was that I'd be kind of a straight narrator, kind of helping lead the audience into the story. But something wasn't quite feeling right about it. And we had worked with, consulted with a great consulting editor, and he says, you need to turn Jim into a character. He can't just be this guy talking out here. And it wound up being a great decision, really critical, because I, not only, you know, was I, it became much more of my being able to share a little bit more, but the fact of the matter is that I think it just improved things. And in fact, Nicole said, you know, when we interview you, Jim, we want to have Denise just off camera, so you're talking to her, so that I was talking to somebody from the community and somebody who also had been at Jeanette and somebody I had known. And
yeah, it worked. It was great. It was a great decision. Okay, so I have time for two more questions. One is, I want to make sure we get in, what can people do afterwards, Sarah, with all of the work you're putting in right now to make sure that it's more than just the documentary, that there's a life afterwards?
Nicole, do you want to take this? Are you on? Since we've missed you on this call. Yeah, why don't you take it while you're live?
Okay. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. So the question was, what can people do? Is that right?
Yeah, I think people really want to know, it's come in the questions, first of all, what do we do as people with, and a woman put it very lovely, Rebecca said, how can those of us with invisible disabilities, i.e. we don't have to necessarily disclose it, it may not be noticed, use our privilege to advance disability rights? So I think that's really important to put out there. And then on top of it, I know you're working on a post-documentary program that people can use after that. So if you could touch on both those things.
I'll talk a little bit about the impact campaign, and then Jim, you should chime in. But we have developed a really robust impact campaign that Sarah has raised an extraordinarily healthy amount of resources for. It's really exciting. Our idea was not to leave the history kind of in the past, but to really bring it into the present and to leverage the story and the messaging of the documentary to really kind of support and ignite and lift up the voices of people who are doing the really exciting grassroots kind of on the ground work now that's more analogous to like what folks did then. And so one of the most exciting kind of parts of the disability movement at the moment is the disability justice movement, which purposely chooses to center the leadership and voices of people of color and LGBT people in the community. And so we've been working with a couple of extraordinary young activists who've designed a campaign that, among other things, now that we're in the time of the pandemic, has morphed into a 16-session virtual Crip Camp where activists from all over the world and also allies and people who are interested in learning about the disability community and the movement are coming and doing capacity building and getting training, talking with each other. And that is at cripcamp.com. If you go to our website, you can find out about that. You can find out about an emergency fund that was set up to support disabled creatives and activists who have been impacted by COVID. There's a fellowship to support storytellers and artists and pair them with mentors and the working in the industry who have disabilities. So there's a whole suite of things just from our website. Also, there are resources if you want to have a screening, host a discussion. There's an educational curriculum that we're developing. So there's lots of offshoots of Crip Camp, but that's obviously, just the tip of the iceberg really in terms of what needs to be done or could be done. So Jim, I don't know if you want to.
Well, I just want to point out that someone named Ruth went to camp and Jim knows her, and this is so exciting and sad because it's just so much fun. I love that.
She was a counselor there.
Oh my God.
And Ruth is somebody that I've never forgotten, and we've been just a little bit of touch here and there, but very little. And it was one of the counselors in girls' camp, and so it's really.
Ruth in the footage?
I think she's in there somewhere. And Ruth, I know you're in the chat here, but if you've seen the film and you've seen yourself in there, let us know. I have such a vivid. If not, she's totally in the photographs if she's not in the footage. But
okay, so Jim, what do you want people to like? What can we do? How do we react to this movie? We sat there, we cried at the movie. How do we not let it just be a moment?
Well, first off, also, there was a two-part question you had asked, and there was somebody who said I have a hidden disability, and how can I be a better ally? And I would say that when you have a hidden disability, you do have a choice of whether to reveal yourself as disabled or not. And the stigma around disability makes it a dangerous thing for some people. But the more that, if you are able to identify to your friends and your employer, saying, by the way, I have this disability, be it diabetes or other things like that, that it lets them know that, oh my gosh, we are all over the place, but people don't always see us or acknowledge it. And the more people that are open about it, it helps dispel stigma. And that I think a lot of people think, oh my God, I'm going to lose my job, or people are going to treat me differently. And that's not always the experience that people have. So I would say, and to answer your question, Sue, it's, if you see something going on that you feel is belittling or is, prejudicial, or, somebody perpetuating a stereotype around disability, you need to call it out. You need to say something. I don't think anybody's going to beat you up for saying, stop making fun of this person in a wheelchair. But, but it's very important that.
See something, say something.
Well, but it's also, it used to be acceptable to make fun of midgets or, other folks, and it's not. And you need people, we need to respect everyone, disability or not. And I think that what we're learning right in this very moment right now is that it's time to fish or cut bait. You have to say something and get involved. And tell your friends to see our film, tell people what you learned. If you have a friend that's using their dead aunt's handicap parking placard, steal it from them and cut it up.
Can I also jump in and say, look at your local community, look to your local disability organizations, seek out disability organizations that have people with disabilities in leadership roles, and also look within your own Jewish community. Is the bima at your shul accessible? Does your Hebrew school, can your Hebrew school accommodate a blind or deaf student? What about your summer camps? You know, Judy told a story on a recent Q&A about not being able to attend Jewish summer camp when she was little, and it's still clearly very painful for her. So you can look very local too, and don't wait for a person with a disability to show up who needs the accommodations. Just do it. When you have events in the real space, hopefully soon, you know, say if the venue is wheelchair accessible. If it's not, acknowledge that. Say, we'll try to do better in the future, but this is not accessible. It shows an awareness. If your place of employment or any place else is doing diversity, equity, and inclusion work, disability is rarely included in that. Raise your hand and get it included. There's plenty we can all do very locally in our own worlds.
Those were great examples. Thank you. Okay, my last question. I've used up more time than I was allotted, but I still want to do my last question. Sorry. I want everybody to go into the chat. And while you're typing, I want Sarah, Jim, and Nicole to answer this question. You're all getting the same question. Do you have a favorite moment in the film? So just put yours in the chat, and Sarah, Jim, Nicole, tell us what your favorite moment in the film was. Sarah, start with Sarah.
That's a tough one. I have different favorites each day.
All right, a favorite.
Go to somebody else. Nicole, are you live? Yes.
Yeah, let me know if I'm not.
Yeah, you're good. You're good.
I guess same. I have so many. I still like every time we end up watching it at an event or something virtually. We're not getting to screen it in theaters, but every time I do get to see some of it again, I'm just as like happy to be.
All right, Jim, what's yours?
I think that the scene with Al Levy at the camp where we're in the middle of the crabs epidemic, and he says, you know, I don't itch and my wheelchair doesn't itch. Al was that kind of guy, you know, and so I just really love seeing him.
And Jessica just typed that simultaneously, crabs outbreak.
I would say for me today, it's Denise's story about the surgeon taking out a perfectly healthy appendix, and this long involved story where she gets to the point. So I went back to school and got my degree in human sexuality. It just for me is the power of Denise, the beauty of Denise.
Yeah. Okay, Nicole, we can see your eyes blinking. What was your favorite moment?
Okay, really quick, I'm just going to say that one moment that I love is at the very, very end when Larry, the camp director, is watching on the video monitor Jim and Nancy talking about their first anniversary, and he just throws his head back and just laughs with all this love, and Judy and all the other counselors are watching and laughing and enjoying it, and you feel sad because, you know, it's the end of the movie and you know that not all the characters are still around, but you also feel joy, and I feel like that's one of the things I love about the film is there's so many complicated, amazing emotions kind of wrapped up in so many of the scenes.
Okay, I don't know the names, but it's the guy who did the dancing.
Steve,
and the campers are in a circle with the counselors, and the person with the camera hands the microphone to a woman who has a very hard time speaking, and that moment of a long time of everybody sitting and allowing her time with the mic, and then that guy translating what he thinks she said and her nodding. I thought, like, to give someone that humanity, I mean, when do people give that time to somebody who takes too long and not even clearly to speak? So that was like, that was the moment, like that was the watershed moment for me. Okay, this was amazing talking to the three of you. There's so many more questions here. I'm sorry for everybody who put a question in there that it didn't get asked. But your movie, the documentary is transforming people. So, you know, you set out to do something, and I think for me, I can say it far exceeded anything I expected when I watched it. And I came out a different person. So thank you very much for that. And I turn it over to Michelle.
Thank you, Sue, and thank you to all our panelists. I think, you know, it truly is, it's such an inspiring moment to not only see and hear how this was created, but to see how far we've come and how all of the things that you did your posse and where you've come and how we now as a society, there's so much more work to do, but to just look back and see, and how Sarah talked about these local different initiatives and what's happening and how to get involved and how to really make a difference. It's a great segue, not planned, but thank you, Sarah, for everything that we're doing here in Cleveland, specifically at the Jewish Family Services Association. And so we wanted to bring it all back to Cleveland here, and we invite Debbie Chickering from JFSA to talk and share what's going on here and how we're making lives accessible, Jim, to so many here in Cleveland through so many of our programs. So I'm going to turn it over to Debbie so that she can share with the group all that's going on right in our backyard.
Good evening, everybody. I want to thank you so much for letting JFSA be part of tonight. I feel very honored to be able to talk to you. So JFSA does work with folks with disabilities on a daily basis. We provide services to about 600 individuals with mental disabilities and about 150 people with developmental and intellectual disabilities on a regular basis. Many of them we serve 24/7, 365 days a year. And it's what we love. It's what we do, and we enjoy it so much. We do have a full array of services, from the residential homemaker personal care services to day support, social and recreational services, counseling, psychiatry, just to name a few. Working with so many individuals over the last 30 years, I've heard some terrible, terrible stories from people with disabilities about being left out and ridiculed, harassed, left behind, all because of a disability. And we know that individuals with disabilities were often treated as less than, with no rights and with little value. Assumptions were made that disability equaled inability to work or create, to have fun, to think, and to make choices of their own. Everyone says that we live in a rapidly changing world, and that's true for many, many things, but some things are very slow to change. And acceptance of others that are different than we are is slow with a capital S. But we have seen change occur, thankfully. So when JFSA opened its first residential home for individuals with disabilities back in 1986, it was really quite a fight with the Shaker Heights community to allow what they considered a group home to come into their neighborhood. They felt that we would bring property values down and that we would not be good neighbors. And we really had to come in and prove ourselves at that time. And even through the years that came forward, and we served people at over 60 sites in the southeastern communities, as well as in Geauga County and a couple in Summit County. We've still had issues where somebody that might be having a mental health crisis and need hospitalization and EMS services would be treated as if they were somehow doing something to the community that was negative, and we would have to intervene with the police department. And so we have seen folks with disabilities just treated so unfairly. And we think it's primarily an educational thing. And so we work every day to try to help people to understand who we are and what we do and who we serve. And we have seen a huge difference. For instance, when we opened our newest home in South Euclid a couple of years ago, instead of that fight with City Hall, if you will, to be able to bring that home into the neighborhood, instead, we had this wonderful, welcoming sort of open house where people from the community came, as well as the mayor coming and talking about how happy she was to have us in her community. And that's such a beautiful change that we've seen. And certainly the Americans with Disabilities Act helped pave the way for communities to get to know people with disabilities And it's so much easier to accept someone who is different than you if you get to know them. I thought it was touching in the movie at sort of near the beginning, where there was a new camp counselor that had come in, and he walked up onto the bus to start helping folks unload. And he said he froze because he had never seen so many people with disabilities in one spot. And I do think that that there are a lot of people that have that kind of a reaction to anything that's new. You know, if we think about the things that are going on right now, if you think about the first time maybe you went to the grocery store recently and you saw everybody walking around in masks, it is something that is startling, and it takes you a minute to breathe through it. And then you realize this is just life. And so you move on. Our Horowitz Youth Ability Program helps people here at home and all across the country get to know people with disabilities and abilities, and get used to them and get to know them as people. And then they see that they are people like everybody else. They have the same desires, the same wants, the same needs as you or me or anybody that we know. And they do wonderful volunteer activities throughout the community, from building Metroparks trails to packing MedWish medical supplies. They deliver lunches and help out in the community events. They script and perform plays specifically to help alleviate and diminish stigma. In fact, a recent high point in our recent history was being asked to perform on the Mainstage as the headline show at Walt Disney World back in 2016. And we were the first group of disabled performers at Walt Disney World. And the Youth Ability Ambassadors rocked their performance of Peace, Love, and Youth Abilities to a standing ovation that was heard across the park. And staff there at Walt Disney World really remarked on the fact that they had just never seen that kind of reception from an audience. And so we were thrilled to show that, yes, people with disabilities have amazing abilities. Similarly, a couple of years ago, we did a trip to the Grand Canyon, and we worked with the Grand Canyon School, students and staff. And being in a national park, the school is actually in the national park in a very remote area, very far from healthcare. And so if your family has a child that has a disability, you move from that area because you just do not have the access to the services that you need. And so most of the students there, K through 12, had really never known or interacted with individuals with disabilities. And this was a fabulous, intimate learning experience for that community. And they stayed in touch with us and wrote letters to us for quite some time after we came home. So I won't say that we now never encounter prejudice or pointed looks when we're out in the community, because we're everywhere. We're walking in the neighborhoods, and we're going to restaurants, and we're doing everything that you and your family do. And so we sometimes get looks like, why are you here? Or, you know, I'm not really comfortable having you here. But we feel like we want to have a voice, and certainly the ADA gave us that voice, and it has made a world of difference. I love the message from Crip Camp that the problem does not exist with people with disabilities. The problem exists with people without disabilities. And Youth Ability has a similar message. In preparation for this event, Heidi, the coordinator of the program, was asking all of the ambassadors if they knew someone with a disability. Now, remember, this is Youth Ability, which is designed for young adults with disabilities. So Heidi asked them, do you know somebody with a disability? And every one of them said, no, I don't know anybody with a disability. So at this time, our Youth Ability ambassadors have created a video to share with you about themselves and how they choose to be labeled. So thank you again so much for having us here tonight. We really appreciate it. And if you need to know more about what's happening locally, you are welcome to come and visit us at JFSA at any time. Enjoy the video.
Hello, thank you for including Youthability in the Federation event. The Horowitz Youthability program of JFSA empowers exceptional youth by engaging them in volunteerism. We believe that we help ourselves by helping others. The participants in our group are called ambassadors. We believe they are representing themselves. They are representing Youthability and JFSA and people just like them all over. And we want each of our ambassadors to know that they are an important member of our community. And we're going to meet our first ambassador now.
Hello, my name is Ronit. The role for myself is kind, and I'm good at computers.
Hello, my name is Brenna. My word for myself is friendly, and I'm good at coloring.
My name's Brandon, and I like being here.
Hello, I am Megan Donahue. My word for myself is happy. I am good at art.
Hello, my name is Evan. The word for myself is respect, and I'm a very hard worker.
My name is Ryan. My word for myself is happy. I am good at swimming.
Hello, my name is Ted. My word, my help is one. I am good at being a friend.
My name is Jenny. My word for myself is helpful. I'm good at cooking, coloring, and yoga. My name is Maya. My word is awesome, and I am good at singing.
My name is Irene. My word is motivated, and I'm good at singing and dancing.
My name is Emily. My word is mindfulness, and I'm very good at coloring and reading.
My name is Brittany Rice. My word for myself is supportive. I am good at tie-dyeing, coloring pages, bracelets, and living in my own.
That was good, guys. That was really, really good.
So thank you so much again for letting us to be part of this. And I hope to meet many of you in the future.
Thank you, Debbie, and thank you to the amazing voices of Youthabilities. Thank you all for joining us tonight. Thank you to Sue and to Jim and Sarah and Nicole and to Debbie. And I think there's just so many inspiring moments from tonight, from the film, from Youthabilities. And I think all of us should just use our voices and make change. Thank you all. Have a wonderful evening. Stay safe, stay healthy, and just love, right? Just a lot of love.